now I am moving on to the wonderful Cheryl Doig, another doctor in the room, actually. Cheryl is a professional futurist and has Think Beyond. She's combined a background in education with wide experience in leadership, governance, and futures thinking. She has extensive governance experience in the health, education, and charitable sectors. She is currently chair of Aka Otatahi Learning City Christchurch and trustee on the Food for Thought Trust. She is founder of the Otatahi Futures Collective. And if you haven't heard of that, please find out, because it's an amazing thing. And a professional member of the Association for Professional Futurists. Cheryl is also director of Think Beyond and a co-host of the Future of Learning Conference. She speaks, writes, and contributes on topics of complex change, strategic foresight, futures literacy, and leadership. She challenges the status quo and is a pro-activist for ethical, equitable, and sustainable change. We are so happy to have you in the room today, Cheryl. Thank you.
Mihi nui kia koutou, ko Cheryl Doig toku ingoa no o te tahi ahau. Just like to acknowledge ngai tuahuriri and also to start with a whakatauki. And this is important in the futures space. So if you don't know about much about the futures and you think it's a bit of a fluffy thing, I hope to be able to convince you otherwise. So kia whakatomuri te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. And this is really important in my worldview of what futures thinking is all about, because future is not something that we are moving into as past, present and future, all interwoven together. And so we're sitting here because our ancestors made decisions then that impacted on the future. And so this is a critical part of considering what you're doing today and this week and in your own mahi and your organisations and your personal life. That is creating the future. So it needs to be really powerful, no pressure. All right, so I'd normally do this in about a 45-minute exercise, and we're going to take about 2 minutes, so you'll be pleased to know that we're not going to take the 45 minutes. But just thinking about this and your own worldview, the future is bright, the future is bleak. Just in your head, think about where you sit in that space, and imagine yourself walking to the front of the room if you think the future is bright. And you can interpret that however you like. It might be in your business or it might be in your personal life. There's no rules, okay? Future is bright, you'd be walking to the front towards me. The future is bleak, you'd be walking to the back. All right, so just think about where you would situate yourself and just place yourself there. Okay, got that? All right, Pai. All right, so now the next part. What do you think in terms of whether you can influence the future or not? So again, you've placed yourself either towards me because the future is bright or towards the back, the future is bleak. If you think that you can influence the future, you've got some sense of agency, you can imagine yourself now moving also to that side of the room. And if you don't think that you've got too much say because there are greater structures and things in place, then you'd see yourself moving to that side of the room. So now you might be in different places around the room. And just think which of those quadrants you might be in. So I'm just going to ask, the top left quadrant, I think I can influence the future, I have agency, and the future is bright. Just give a wave if you see yourself in that quadrant. All right, so great to see that we've got quite a few people in the room that think they can influence and are positive about the future. I'm not sure that you always sort of feel that sometimes at these things. All right, let's go to I think the future is bright, and while I might have some sort of impact, there are structures in place that might make it difficult for me. Who put themselves in that quadrant? All right, the future is bleak. But I have some sort of agency. I can do a few things even though it may not make a difference globally. Thank you. And then the last quadrant, there are grander forces at play. The the future's bleak, and I might as well just do whatever I want because it's not going to make any difference anyway. We're all stuffed. No one's admitting. All right. So this is part of a work from a Jew called Frederick Pollack, and there's a whole bigger sequence to this work. But one of the things about doing this sort of process is it asks us to think about how we view the future, and also to explore that from the other people in our organisations, because we can't develop an image for the future as a country or as an organisation unless we've talked and we've collaborated and thought about the options and come to some sort of, not necessarily agreement, but understand the worldviews of other people. And so images for the future is a critical part of the future space. So we're going to move on from there to just a slight little bit of myth busting about futures thinking, and what I do in my mahi as a futurist. And so there are four things I just want to briefly touch on. One is the idea of certainty. So futures thinking isn't certainty. Well, that's your life. Let's face it, that's my life as well. While we crave certainty, it doesn't just happen like that. And so in a world that's increasingly complex, we're not seeking to have this is what it looks like, which leads to the right answer. And so often we're talking about there are problems to be solved and there are polarities to be managed. And we're much more in that state of it could be this or it could be that, and I'm just trying to manage all of those things together. And so as leaders in the future space, it's really important to be able to maintain that, not necessarily balance, but be noticing what the different things that are happening are, and be able to respond accordingly. The other one is I often get asked if I have a crystal ball, and actually I do have a crystal ball. It's about that big, and I bought it in a garage sale because I thought, got to have a crystal ball. But it's like, if I had a crystal ball and could predict stuff, I'd make lots of money. All right, I wish. And I was sort of talking earlier about some of the forecasting that was done. And it doesn't always work like that, because prediction is forecasting. It's based on the past and on trends, and it's an important thing. But that's not what I do in the futures space, because futurists come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them short and futures aunties like me. So what I work in is the space of anticipation, and that takes you to a new space of saying we need to have the here and now and the predictable, but we need to be able to think differently. And to do that, we have to be in the space of anticipation as well, and which leads into the moving from one future to there are multiple futures, and who knows how they will pan out. But the more we've thought about those options and we're able to scan the environment in our businesses or in our personal lives, the more adept we will be at managing those things as they happen, and to be able to move quickly and agilely. And if we don't, then that's where we get caught up, because we think there's just one alternative. So in this space, it's always about futures, not future. Right, so that's the quick lesson. And I talked about polarities and the leading in a both-and world, and I just see this as a critical part of the work in the future space and in the where we face ourselves in these times now. And without going into the whole work on polarities, if this isn't either or, it's both-and, because this is the world you're facing as leaders, where you've got to manage risk. But there's so many opportunities, and we've heard about that this morning, that those opportunities exist, and they go side by side, and you're moving from one to the other and exploring both. You've got, at the moment, the just now instead of the just transition, and how you manage those, because there are lots of sound bites. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's quite a few sound bites sort of going around the country right now about how we're going to solve things, and we've got these problems and we're going to solve them. And so that's just now, because that's what people apparently want to hear, instead of a just transition, and that moving to the bigger worldview and the opportunities and the urgency of where we're faced right now. So that whole polarity mapping is moving beyond the tyranny of the urgent. So I just want to give you a little example of why it's important to be constantly looking around and being curious as a mindset to help us through these times. And here's an example. We had a bit of a talk about meat this morning. So last year, the small city of Harlem, first in the world to ban meat adverts in public spaces. And so this is their solution to reducing consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Right, so think about that from a worldview point of view. That's one view of the future and how they are thinking they will deal with it. So you think about that in terms of the consequences, both intended and unintended. So let's move to a different one. So you've got these multiple things happening in the same industry or affecting, and it's not either is right, they're just different, and they're based on our worldviews and the past, present and future all interwoven together. This is why knowing what's happened in the past is a really important part of the moving into the future, because it's based on all of our historical expectations, our country's history, our personal histories and so on. I don't know which one you support. They're both really interesting, and there are heaps of other ones as well. And so it's just like, what else is out there, and what does that mean for me in my industry? So that idea of looking for weak signals in the future space is a really critical part. One of my friends who's a futurist, he talks about the emergent future. So the official future is like, we've got the stuff to do, and we've got these exponential things that we're working towards, and then we act incrementally towards them. And that future is the official future, where it's in the rails of what we know and how we've acted in the past. And what he says is that the emergent future is in the space of thinking transformationally, of trying to do things differently and then acting transitionally. And so not being in lockstep, but more of instead of a strategic plan, more of a vector plan, where you take one step and you learn along the way, and then you go somewhere else. So you're aiming for a particular vision, but you don't have it set in concrete. And that's why I really liked Ben's sort of approach, because I see that as something that's trying to do something that's outside of those rails. And so that whole idea of an emergent future, I think we need to challenge ourselves a lot more in terms of what we're doing personally and professionally to build the future. And here's one of the reasons why. I asked for permission to use this photo. It's actually my granddaughter. She figured she probably wasn't, you couldn't probably tell it was her, and it was a few years old. All right, so our young people, like many of us, are worried about the world and where we're heading. And so we've got a real problem in terms of supporting our young people, and one of our responsibilities is as adult allies to support young people through the transitions and learning how to cope with the future and what that looks like. And I just want to take you back 10 years. So 10 years ago, I was on a project called The Amazing Place. It was a competition to build a playground in Christchurch. And it was for years, early childhood through to year 8 students. Design your playground that you would love to have to make Christchurch an amazing place. And what resulted? The Margaret Mahy Playground. Okay? Now, I don't know if you've been there. How many of you have been on the slide? Excellent. And so what I love about that is that on the day that all of the submissions had to be in, there were little kids walking across this area with these big dioramas and models, and there were Minecraft things and all sorts of things that these young people had designed because they had hope and creativity and they wanted to design things. And from that, the Margaret Mahy Playground emerged, and it is so popular because young people were involved and they helped design it. All right, and so I have faith in our young people, and I see one of our jobs is to be the allies to support them in their mahi. And so one of the books I recommend, how many of you have read The Good Ancestor? No, the answer is not yet. Okay, so the reason I recommend this is because it talks about that dilemma between the 6 drivers of short-termism and the 6 ways of thinking long. And so we sort of are in the short-termism space at the moment with elections, etc., but it gives ideas for moving forward into the idea of thinking long. And Roman Krasnerick is the partner of Kate Raworth, so Donut Economy, all right, so that's the sort of connection there. Recommend it because it's got lots of good ideas, and what that being a good ancestor obviously is for the future generations that we're here thinking about. But I've been involved in some work on intergenerational fairness. There's a whole big project with the School of International Futures that's about how we might consider fairness from a all generations perspective, and that everyone needs to find their place. And so there's a whole lot of processes and policies and work that you can get in your business, whether it's corporate, government, local body, etc., that asks you to think about your policies, your ways of working, etc., considering some of these questions. I'm not going to read them out to you, but it's about the thinking about not just future generations, but all of the generations that we serve. And the deeper part of this for me is about the diversity. So a couple of months ago, I hosted Sophie Howe, who was the first Commissioner for Future Generations in Wales. And you might know that that position is a mandated government position, which is great because what it does is say this has to be considered whenever there's something new that comes up in terms of legislation. And it's because of that they've been able to do some amazing things, especially in say, roading. There are roads that haven't been built because when they went back to say, what impact will this have on future generations, they couldn't justify it. All right, so that's a really important thing. That intergenerational fairness, I think we need to build into our futures conversations. And of course we are. I don't know if, how many of you have seen the latest Productivity Commission's work on a fair chance for all, but you might not be able to read it, but right up in the top it says Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and Commissioner for Future Generations. So they are saying, hey, we think this is an important thing to do. I'd say we needed it a long time ago and we need it now because this doesn't sit alone, it sits within the mapping of where we are in terms of planetary boundaries, but also all of the work that we do locally and nationally. So I want to take you into the how do you do something in your business, your organisation or your personal life to move towards the future. And the first challenge I'd put is to consider what in your organisation is in the used future. And you'll see that it's that the definition that I put up there, a practice that continues even though it's no longer linked to the broader vision or strategy or the changing world. It's just one of those things that we hold dear, or we've done it forever. Is there something in your organisation that might fit that bill? And if you don't think there is, I wonder what the people in your company would think. It's a good question to ask and challenge yourself. So that's the first challenge from a company perspective. The second one I might need to just explain a little, and this is the some work from Rangatahi looking at the changing nature of them being concerned about digital data. And they went from the metaphor of yourself, our data, to developing myself, my data, my taonga. All right, and by changing that metaphor, they actually then were able to implement some change into what that looked like. So the use of language and metaphor is a really, really important thing. And another example, in an auditing group that did this work, they went from the metaphor of auditors as policemen to auditors as community constables. So I think that's a really important change. And so what are those metaphors that you have in your company? And the third that I just want to mention is the use of a futures triangle. So just have a look at that for a few moments. You've got these three things interacting. You've got the weights of the past, you've got the push of the present, and the pulls of the future. And it's a really useful exercise to do, to have a look at those three things and how they interact. And in the middle I put the intergenerational fairness, just because I think that should be something that we keep in mind in the work that we're doing. All right, so we're not going to have time to sort of workshop that, but that's a really important thing to consider when you're looking at moving your organisation forward for the future. So some things in the weights you want to keep, all right, but why do you? What's so important, and what are the values that ground you and your organisation, and what ones are the used future and you need to get rid of? What are the pockets of promise that you want to amplify, and you can see some positivity, and the signs that signals that you should be monitoring? But then the metaphor for the future and where you're heading is a really important part. So I'm going to finish with 3 slides about this word hope. If we don't have any hope, then we may as well give up. And you had a lot of people that were in that top left-hand quadrant of, I think I can take action and make a difference. That starts every day. And so this work on the Future Library is an example. This started in 2014. They planted a forest in Norway, and it's going to supply paper for a special book that is going to be printed in 100 years' time, so 2114. And each year they get a different writer to contribute, and they don't publish the books, etc. They're just stored away. The first book was Margaret Atwood. Fascinating place to visit, and it's in the public library at Oslo. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't think there was hope in the world. So I just want to leave you with a couple of slides, and I'm not going to talk about, just play them for a couple of minutes, and then just invite you to reflect on what those might mean to you. You see, I think the challenge is to be in that transformation space and not to do the things that we've always done, but there's so much that needs to change, and we all have a role in that, and so it does need a change in our thinking and behaviour, which is why I work in the futures mindset space and think that's a really, really critical thing, because if we don't have any hope of the future, but also if we haven't planned for those things in the future, like a new epidemic or pandemic, etc., then we need to be doing a whole lot of work, and that requires us to be brave in our thinking. So thanks.